Hey there, Ill Factor here. Now, when I first started out producing music, and specifically mixing my own music, I always became frustrated with how to get reverb to sit well in my mix. More importantly, I just couldn't find the right balance to getting the right type of dimension and space when it comes to putting reverb on my vocals. So in this video, I want to walk you through some practical steps that can help you do exactly that. Create the right amount of space and dimension in your mix with using reverb. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So here's a session from a project that I'm currently working on. It's featuring Cher, who's currently signed to Atlantic Records. So I'm just going to play you the track so you get the general vibe and feel of the record, and that way you get to see what it sounds like with no effects. And then we'll go ahead and put some reverb and walk you through processing it so we can have the vocal fit in the right type of environment that matches the overall vibe.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret. You've been on the same, I'm wondering why is it you can't respect this? Find a reason.
Okay, so the vocal is really cool and it's got a great texture to it. But now what we're going to do is use a reverb to give it some nice space and dimension so that it actually fits in the right type of atmosphere that I'm looking for this actual record. So let's go over to our audio effects folder, and we're going to click and drag just a normal stock reverb, and you could follow along and use this in any of your DAW, whether you're using Pro Tools, Logic, Fruity Loops, your grandmother's washboard, whatever you're using. Just go ahead and follow along, and the same principles can be applied all across the board. So I'm going to click and drag this reverb on a return track. And the reason why I'm doing that is so that I can send not just this vocal, but maybe other vocal tracks through the same reverb processing. Now, this is a specific way that I like to visualize sending vocals to a auxiliary return track. And this was helpful for me, so I hope it helps you. If it doesn't, don't worry. But one way I actually like to treat sending vocals to a reverb is to picture a performance on stage. And when I send more of that performer, whether it's an instrument or a vocalist, when I send more of that to the reverb, what I'm basically doing is asking that performer to step farther away back in the stage. So technically, if you want it to be farther in the mix, meaning in the distance or back in the mix, then you would send more to the reverb. If I wanted it to be much more up front in the mix, then I would send less reverb or none at all. And that's what's happening now. So there's no reverb, so the vocal's right there, right in smack front of the mix. So that little visualization pretty much helped me a lot in my earlier stages of getting the concept of, okay, I want this vocalist to sound like she's further back in the band. So I would send more of that to the reverb, or less if I just wanted it to be up more front. And this would work with any type of instrument or anything in your mix for that matter. So let's solo the vocal and send some reverb.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways.
So one thing I typically tend to do whichever reverb I'm using is I tend to EQ my signal processing before it goes to the reverb. Now in this reverb in particular, there is some input processing, so you can actually do some low cut and high cut here. So that gives you that type of processing here. But sometimes I would actually drag and drop an EQ before the reverb, just so that I have better control and a little bit more liberty as to what it is that I'm cutting out before it actually goes into the reverb. So if I really wanted a dark and warm sounding reverb, and if you might have noticed that you'll get a lot of presets with those words in there: dark reverb, dark hall, warm reverb, warm hall. And what they're saying is they're eliminating a lot of the high end off of those presets. So that's what this is. That's what I'm kind of going for. This is a very mysterious and dark type of track, and it's kind of minor, so I'm not wanting a lot of high end or shimmer. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all that high end out using this EQ. So I'll do this to taste by just listening to it and trimming back what I don't want to hear.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
So that gives me a nice warm sound before it goes into the reverb. That's going to affect the reverb signal. Now, when do you want to use a warm reverb as opposed to just an open bright one? At times, I like to use warm or dark hall or in this case, just a reverb with less high end for a lot of intimate tracks. So when there is very minimal instrumentation, I tend to just lean towards a darker or a warmer reverb. When there's a lot of instrumentation, or I just want it to be nice, bright, and shimmery, then I would use a reverb with, you know, more of the high end on the EQ. So it's about training your ears to understand what it is about the reverb that makes it more intimate, what makes it more suitable for the certain music that you're working on, because that's how you start to use these things artistically. You don't want to get in the habit of just putting a reverb just for the sake of putting reverb. You want to put a reverb on a track if it actually makes sense to do so. Yes, it's going to give dimension and space to that instrument, but more importantly, will it get the message across? Will this reverb make this track feel more intimate? Will it make her vocal performance match the overall mood that I'm striving for? And as a producer, it's my role and duty to make sure that I'm kind of striving for the overall feel to be in a certain direction. And so that's what I'm aiming for here. And I'm not just trying to throw a reverb just for the sake of, well, every track has a reverb. Sometimes I might not use a reverb, just use a delay instead. But for this case, I wanted to give some dimension, and I wanted it to be intimate. So I'm using that EQ to shave off any of the high end to accomplish just that. So once I've gotten my warm reverb in place by using an EQ before the reverb, I'm going to move on to the next attribute of a reverb, and that is the pre-delay. And this is an important one because the pre-delay determines how soon the reverb actually takes place. Does it happen immediately when the vocal goes to the reverb, or is there a little bit of time so that you actually get to hear the dry vocal and then immediately the reverb will follow? And so if you have a short pre-delay time, that means the reverb will happen immediately. The longer the pre-delay, the more distance there is between the dry vocal and the actual reverb itself. So let me give you an example. Here, the pre-delay is set to 0.50 milliseconds. That means it's going to happen as soon as it goes straight to the reverb.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they want.
So you can see that the vocal is being processed immediately. Now, with the pre-delay set all the way in the opposite end of the spectrum, with 250 milliseconds, you'll hear a little bit of the dry and then the reverb immediately after.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they want to hear and wait.
So it's all about finding a really good balance. Now, I tend to like having a long, a good distance with some pre-delay, so that the reverb doesn't kind of infiltrate the mix. It doesn't get up front. It can actually sit nice in the back of the vocal. And the vocal still becomes dominant, but yet the reverb just kind of becomes this nice little blanket behind it. So we'll have the reverb there, but I don't know yet because I'm going to hear it in context with the rest of the stuff. So let's talk about the size of the room, stereo depth, and decay. Believe it or not, I'm going to start with the decay first. So decay determines the actual tail, or how long the reverb tends to sound or continue processing after the signal has ended. So like if you were to play it and you hit spacebar and the continuation of the reverb, that's a decay time.
Kiki, try to mend the...
So there's your decay time there. But you don't necessarily need to have long decay times in order to actually have a big reverb. In case in point, if you have a shorter decay, it actually reflects more of the actual size of the room. What I mean by that is, with a shorter decay time, you can actually hear the difference that the room size makes when you adjust the size. So here's a very short decay time, and we have the size of the room, fairly large, or whatever parameter this is.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they want to hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent, find a secret.
So the decay time being short actually reflects more of what that room size would actually sound like. And so the shorter the size of the room, or the lower in value, meaning the smaller the room you're in, having the decay time short will allow you to actually hear the actual realistic reflections of that room.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they want to hear.
So if you're trying to go for like a stairwell, or like a small little bathroom or something like that, you would have a small room size, maybe even a shorter decay time.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
Now, the trick is training your ear to understand when you would use a setting like that. And that's just understanding, okay, I know what that sounds like. I know how to accomplish that type of sound, that bathroom, that small room type of sound. Um, and that could be great for a snare drum or guitar riff or something like that. Or if you're going to use it for maybe some background vocals or things like that. But that's how I like to kind of give some sonic space and texture with the vocal. So I'll see if this actually works in the context of the mix. Now, so it's a very intimate and there's few instrumentations in this track. So this might not be the right size room for this vocal, but let's just check it out anyways.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
And this is without the reverb.
You've been on the same, I'm wondering why is it you can't respect this?
Now the change is very subtle when it's a small room like that. So in order to have it nice and spacious, we're going to increase the room size. So let's increase the room size because I want her to sing in a nice big open room. And now I'll go ahead and increase a little bit of the decay time. So let's just solo that and see what it sounds like.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
So what I want is more of the tail of the reverb. So we'll go ahead and increase the decay time.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
Now that's cool. Now, if you're asking, why don't you just have a small room size and a giant decay time? Look, I mean, however you set your reverb to getting the sound that you're looking for, so be it. Go for that. That's always the best approach. Use your ears. Make sure it fits well in the context of your mix and whatever that you're striving for. But the reason why I don't have like a small room size and a huge decay time is because it's just technically smearing that small room, and it just smears the reflection of that small room for a very long time. So let me give you an example. If we just hit the small room size and a large decay time, you'll hear the small room just being amplified, or the reflections of that room just go on for a while.
Kiki, try to mend the...
So it gives this little tin canny type of vibe. So I want a bigger space and a little less of that decay time.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear.
Okay. Now on this reverb in particular, they have a CPU usage. So it's on economics, or it's not really using a lot of CPU. The high end of quality just uses a little bit more CPU to get better algorithms for the reverberation that's going on. So I'll set it to high.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they want.
It's a little bit more of a smoother output, so I like that. Now once I got my decay time and the size of the room fixed, I'm going to go to my last parameter that I usually end up tweaking. And I know there's more stuff on the reverb, but I just tend to go to these three areas. That's my pre-delay, that is my size of the room and decay time, and then my diffusion. Okay, so it's kind of weird, but the way I actually visualize the way diffusion works in a reverb is this, and I might sound crazy to you, but it works for me, and I hope it does for you too. Now, having more diffusion, or actually less diffusion, I know this sounds weird, is like adding more things in the room. So imagine the singer, she's in a big open room, and we start bringing in sofas, some couches, maybe some more furniture, some farm animals, a whole bunch of people are there. Well, those elements in the room start to diffuse the reflections, and they stop the actual reflection of the reverb from bouncing in one place or another. They actually diffuse that. So the way it works here is when I crank it to the left, less diffusion means that I'm actually stuffing the room full of sofas and couches and things like that. So there's going to be less of the reflections going on. Let me give you an example.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
So even with a large decay time, you'll still have a longer tail, but yet less reflections.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret.
Now, I'd rather have a smaller tail, but just a bigger feel, bigger sound. So I'm gonna take some of the sofas out. I'm gonna kick some of the people out of the room, and I'm gonna crank up the diffusion a little bit more, so that there's just more reflections going on.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear.
So that sounds about right. Once I get the diffusion where I want it, I get my reverb there. I'll go ahead and EQ the reverb afterwards. So I've got an EQ before, and then I got an EQ after. I can use this to take out maybe any low end that the reverb's adding, and also just fine tune EQ this in the mix. So let's hear this in the context of everything else, and if I need to add more or send her farther back on the stage, we'll just send more of her to the reverb. So let's go ahead and do that now.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret. You've been on the same, I'm wondering why is it you can't respect this?
Now let's take off the reverb.
Find a reason, just the notion to relinquish. Why I say what I mean when I never mean it. Think I got it, find a text I can respond with. Go through pages and pages I wrote to sign it. Wait up, I'm looking over the edge.
Without the reverb.
We were the same before you needed to be.
Now this is with
the one who got the praise for being the person that you once were.
So now I'm hearing it in the context of the mix. I'm probably cutting off a little too much high end going in. So I'm going to go back to the first EQ and just give a little bit more breathing room for that high end. And that's going to allow the reverb to actually come farther in the mix. So what I mean by that is the less high end there is in an element, the farther back it gets in the mix. If I wanted more reverb to shine through, then I should give a little bit more high end going into it. So let's check it out.
Kiki, try to mend the pieces, tell them what they wanna hear in ways that they don't hear too frequent. Find a secret. You've been on the same, I'm wondering why is it you can't respect this?
This is without it.
Find a reason, just the notion to relinquish. Why I say what I mean when I never mean it. Think I got it, find a text I can respond with. Go through pages and pages.
Now, I hope this video was helpful in giving you a little bit of insight in how I use reverb to create dimension and space in my mix. Now, before you go, I have a gift for you. If you click the link below in the description box, I've created an Ableton Live set filled with loops, instruments, vocal chains, effect processes, and effects that you can use in any of your sessions absolutely free. It's my gift for you for watching this video. Just click the link below in the description box. Also, be sure to subscribe so you can keep up to date when I come up with new material. And I'd love to hear from you on what you guys would like me to focus on next. So leave a comment below as well. Thank you and take care.